As I was preparing for this morning, I looked up the word idol in the dictionary. I thought I knew what it meant. I was pretty sure I knew what it meant, and I was right. It means nonsense. It means foolishness. It means ridiculous. It means unbelievable. It was an idle tale. An idle tale. Ridiculous. Foolishness. The women went to the cemetery that day, to the tomb that day with spices. They expected to find Jesus in the tomb. I mean, if we go over to the cemetery this afternoon, do we expect to see Daniel Boone walking around? I think not. Nor did they expect the tomb to be empty, and they certainly didn't expect Jesus to be raised. But there were a couple of messengers there. And there's messengers that said, well, why are you looking for the living among the dead? Now that right there should have caused them go, huh? Looking for the living among the dead? We're not looking for the living, we're looking for the dead. We're looking for Jesus. He died 3 days ago. We're not looking for. Why are you looking for the living among the dead? He is not here. Well, what do you mean he's not here? Where'd he go? Who took him? What'd they do with his body? He is not here. He is risen. And can you imagine the look on their face? Risen? It's the same look I got out there today. You got to be kidding. Either bored and sleeping or incredulous. Because it's outside our frame of reference. We can't imagine it. When people die, they're dead. We put them in a cemetery. We put a stone over there so we can go and visit that place and we can remember. We don't expect the one that we buried yesterday, John Jenkins, to suddenly rise from the dead until the last day. It's outside our frame of reference. We can't understand it. We can't accept it. We can't believe it. It's an idle tale. It's outrageous. It's nonsense. But then the messenger said, remember. And the truth is, the key is in remembering. Said, remember what he told you. And can you imagine all the things that went through their minds? The Beatitudes, the Lord's Prayer, the parables. And not just all the things that he had told them, but all the things he had done. How the lame were walking and the blind were seeing. How the homeless and the orphans and the widows were being taken care of. How the aliens were being welcomed and he was going to other places. They remembered all that stuff when he said, remember what he told you. And then they said, how the Son of Man must die. Which reminded them why they were there, of course, because the Son of Man had died. But he is not risen, just as he said. Now, I don't understand these women. I could have left these out. I don't understand women. I see a head nodding out there. But they believed it. Can you imagine such a thing? If you would have been there standing at the tomb with those women, and notice I said women, not one, not two, not three. We know of 3 or 4 names, and then we know there's a group more. Could have been all of you. They believed what the messenger said because they remembered what Jesus had said, and Jesus had made a difference in their lives. They remembered the change that had taken place in them because of their relationship with him, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, he's alive in me. He's alive in you. And just like that woman who was at the well that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, who when Jesus told her her life story, she ran straight to town to tell everybody that she'd seen someone that told her whole life. And the whole town came out. Well, the women run straight to the disciples. Not to skeptical scoffers like that town, but to the disciples, the ones that, hi disciples, went straight to the disciples, the ones who should have remembered and should have believed, and they tell them this story and they go, bunch of women. It's an idle tale. You know how they are. And Peter goes, I'll go check it out, boys. Don't worry about it. Peter runs to the grave, and the stone's gone. The tomb's empty. Does he run back to tell the rest of the apostles that he saw the same thing? No. He goes home, gets in his lazy boy, gets out the clicker, and watches the football game. His life in that moment was not changed because he hadn't been challenged to remember. Had he been challenged to remember, he too would have remembered the changes that had taken place in his life in these 3 years that he had spent with them. You see, friends, if you're here for me to explain the resurrection to you, I can't do it because it's outside our frame of thinking. It's not possible for me to explain it because I don't know it. But I can tell you I've experienced it. I've experienced it. And you've experienced it. In big ways and in small ways. In little transformations in your life and big transformations in your life. In answered prayer and prayer that we keep praying even though we think it hasn't been answered yet. When we come together in worship, we sense God's presence in our midst as we sing and we pray, and we know the power of resurrection when we hear brass playing "Crown Him with Many Crowns," the Lamb upon the throne. I can't explain it to you, but do you remember? Do you remember that time in your life? Do you remember when you held that new baby for the first time? That's now 24 or 25 or 6 or 60 or 70? Do you remember what it was like? The first time the light bulb went off and you went, yeah, that makes sense. Because someone wrote something or said something and your life was changed in that moment, in big ways or in small ways. That's resurrection. And it comes in the power of God. Jesus didn't raise himself from the dead. God raised him to newness of life, just as God raises all of us. That's the promise of Easter. Not that we're going to fit God into our box. You go to a cemetery to see dead people. That's our box. And we're not fitting God into our box. We're going to climb out of our box and into God's box, where resurrection takes place, life changes, and joy comes in the morning. Our hymn of discipleship this morning is "Crown Him with Many Crowns." I think it's 234, might be 232 in your hymnals. Would you stand together as we sing?